To come up with good ideas and innovation, we need good debates. Not the shouting matches of pundits, but a direct exchange of ideas.
The duty of human beings in protecting human rights.
I don't see this. How you want to convince the Westerners? We are talking about human lives.
We are becoming much more polarized.
And I can
Time
speak for my
is
country.
up.
We're never gonna
Time
move
is
away from
up.
protecting
Time's up.
the
Time's
individual
up.
rights.
Time's up.
Who's the winner? What can we learn from the crossfire? Tune in to Global Arena with me, Tian Wei, only on CGTN. Hello, I'm Tian Wei, and this is Global Arena, a special production of World Insight on CGTN. Mask wearing, quarantine, travel restrictions, lockdowns, and vaccinations. All these measures are implemented to prevent the coronavirus from further spreading. However, they have created debates from day one. Amid the pandemic, it's pretty much a big bone of contention. Quarantine versus individual liberty. Wearing a mask versus no mask. Meanwhile, privacy concerns at a time when you have so many different kinds of mobile apps. How much individual health data are we disclosing? Are we always being watched? The topic for debate today. There is more consensus on human rights amid the pandemic? Yes or no? Team A, they are for the motion. Yes, there is more consensus on human rights amid the pandemic. Team B, they're against the motion. There isn't more consensus on human rights amid the pandemic. My very honor to introduce the debaters. Team A, Professor Zhang Wei from China University of Political Science and Law, who's been doing research about human rights for decades. Welcome, Professor. Minister Alessandro Teixeira, who is a former Brazilian Minister of Development Industry and Foreign Trade, who has also organized the 2 presidential debates when he was serving the administrations. Welcome. Team B, Professor Xie Tao from Beijing Foreign Studies University, the expert in China on American political culture. Welcome. Last but not least, Team B, Frank Siren, best-selling author, documentary filmmaker, who has been a bridge building the links between Chinese and the Western press over the decade. Thank you. Meanwhile, we also have a special arrangement of a panel of observers and commentators. They're joining us now, virtually. Professor Kishore Mahbubani from National University of Singapore, former president of the UN Security Council. Professor Denise Conan from University of Hawaii, who has traveled to China in the 1980s and has been keen bridge builder for China and the United States. Last but not least, Robert Daly, director of the Kissinger Institute on China and the US from the Wilson Center based in Washington, D.C. Welcome to the panel of observers. Thank you. Last but certainly not least, we have a wonderful audience sitting with us here today. My sincere appreciation on behalf of the team for your presence here today. Thank you.
Debate rules. There'll be 3 rounds. First, opening argument. Every debater has 1.5 minutes to establish their argument. Second, free debate. Teams will be allowed to directly challenge each other and pose questions to their opponents. Each team has 8 minutes altogether. Then, final remarks. Each speaker will briefly sum up arguments and make a closing point. And finally, there will be a winning team. 31 audience members will have 1 vote each. 3 observers will have 5 votes each. When added together, there will be the final results.
So, now, let's go to the very first round. The opening statement for Team A and Team B, everyone has 1.5 minutes. The countdown clock will be on the big screen for the last 10 seconds. Let's start with Team A, our first speaker, Professor Zhang Wei, 1.5 minutes.
It's a great pleasure to be here to share with you my understanding of the human rights developments during the COVID-19. I have 3 keywords to describe what I feel. The first word is the right to life. During the COVID-19 process, we realized that the right to life has been upheld as the most important factors to fight against the pandemic. What was experienced in China, we see how important it is to save us from this disaster. My second keyword is the poverty alleviation. As we understand, Chinese government has been making a great pledge to fight against poverty. And Chinese government was one of the very few governments to be able to fulfill the minimum goals. And also now we are up to the sustainable development age. We are able to fulfill this goal in advance, before 2030. The third keyword is non-discrimination equality. As we are fighting the COVID-19, what has been experienced in US is a very important show to us.
All right, time is up. I'm so sorry you're running out of time.
Sorry?
This could also be a good reminder for our other panelists that this is going to be a very limited time. You talk about life, right to life, poverty alleviation, and some of the other points, whether they are up to debate. Let's go to Team B, first speaker, Professor Xie Tao. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Jian Wei. Very honored to be here today. I just want to make the argument that there is no consensus about human rights. We do have a universal declaration of human rights, but there is no universal consensus on the priority of different aspects of human rights. Take the United States as an example. During the COVID-19 crisis, many Americans protested against the social distancing, mandatory face covering, etc., in the name of their political rights. And so they say the government has no right to limit my travel around. I have the right to work. And so they are exercising their political rights to fight for economic rights, right? And so you can see, because of this, Americans are sacrificing about 600,000 lives on the altar of political rights. And then you look at the other opposite. Take the case of China. In China, people have different attitudes about human rights. The Chinese government does prioritize the right to life. And so the government mandates this quarantine, mandate face covering, and there's a lot of electronic monitoring of people's movement. And yes, for many Westerners, this sounds like a violation of their political rights. But look at the results. The Chinese government has been most successful, I would say stunningly successful, in keeping the pandemic under control. And so you can see the contrast. There is no agreement. There is just a disagreement. Okay.
Time is up. Thank you very much, Professor Xie, for sticking with the time. You argue about priorities and differences. Now let's go to the 4-motion team, Team A, number 2 speaker, Minister Teixeira.
First, thank you very much for the CGTN, Chinois, for the invitation, my colleagues here. We live in a complex world, and we have 2 poles today. One pole is called individualism, and another is called collectivism. And this pandemic has shown the 2 faces. And I'm sure when we come out of this pandemic, we're going to see that society needs to arrive in a more consensus way about human rights, meaning your individual rights cannot overrule the collective rights. Countries that we see that kept the individual rights over the collective rights, as Professor just mentioned, are countries like Brazil, United States, and India. They respond for more than 50% of the total deaths in the pandemic. So I'm sure after this terrible moment for our society, we're going to realize and see the numbers that collectivism is the most important element. We need to strike a balance between individualism and collectivism if we want to keep our society prosperous. Thank you very much.
Thank you. As we know, Team A is for the motion. There is more consensus on human rights amid the pandemic. Last speaker, opening arguments from Team B. You're against that motion.
I'm against that motion. Thanks for having me. And I would like to say that COVID is a historical event because it was never clear, more clear than now, that there are different balances in Asia, and we can say not only China, but also Asia and in the West. The Western people, they balance more into the direction of individual rights. The people in Asia, they balance more into the needs of society. And this was actually no conclusion, this big event, this pandemic, but these two ways of dealing with problems of societies, they are more separate than ever. And it's more clear than the Western people don't want to be treated like the Chinese people were treated in China. And on the other side, the Chinese people are saying, no, we don't want to be treated as individual. We want the society, we want the government to solve the problem. And now there's a discussion needed how we can get together. But we have to see that we are more separated than ever before because of this pandemic.
Time is up. Thank you so much for sticking to the time once again. So we have arguments about individual rights vis-a-vis collective rights, about case studies, China, US, Brazil, India, and some of the other countries. We also have a different opinion about whether there is consensus within societies themselves or not. For now, I want to test the temperature of our audience today. We are going to have a preliminary round of voting. Every one of you have one plate in your hand, right? Our little device. So you got the two colors. One color is orange for Team A, for the motion. The other is blue for Team B, against the motion. By the way, it's not about which side of the argument you agree, but rather which team is more convincing today. Okay, so let's have a preliminary vote. 3, 2, 1, let's go. Okay, I got the number. Thank you so much. You can put down. Thank you. So the number is, the preliminary round of voting from our audience, 7 for Team A, or for the motion. 24 for Team B, or against the motion. Once again, I want to emphasize the number is not the result. But later, after all the debate, there will be a real voting.